Lieutenant Samuel Gates pressed his eye against the thermal scope. 3 miles east, heat signatures moved through the tree line. German Panzers, 5 of them. The radio crackled. White infantry screaming for support. Gates pulled back from the scope. His orders were clear. Hold position and observe only. 6 hours earlier, the 761st Tank Battalion had rolled into position outside Morville-lès-Vic, eastern France. November 8, 1944. 5 Sherman tanks under Gates's command. The briefing had been brief. Hold the western approach. Do not advance. White armored units would handle the assault. Gates had nodded. His crew knew better than to argue with orders that made no tactical sense. Staff Sergeant Roy Dixon climbed onto Gates's tank, map in hand. The German defensive line stretched 12 miles north to south. American forces were hitting it head-on, casualties mounting by the hour. Dixon pointed to a gap 3 miles east, no Allied units covering it. Gates studied the map. If German armor moved through that gap, they'd flank the entire American advance. 2,000 infantry would be trapped. The attack began at 0600. Artillery pounded German positions for 40 minutes. Then the white tank battalions rolled forward. Radio chatter filled with contact reports. German 88s opening up. Shermans burning. The advance stalled within an hour. Gates watched through binoculars as smoke rose from disabled American tanks. The German line held. At 0930, the radio call came through. 3rd Battalion, 126th Infantry. Surrounded. German counterattack from the east. Exactly what Gates had predicted. The voice on the radio was young, panicked, requesting immediate armor support. Division Command responded negative, no units available. The infantry lieutenant pleaded. Command cut him off. Dixon looked at Gates. The thermal scope showed those 5 German Panzers moving west. They'd reach the surrounded infantry in less than an hour. Gates grabbed the radio handset. Called division. Requested permission to move east and engage. The response came back in 10 seconds. Negative. Orders are to hold position. Do not, repeat, do not advance. Gates set down the handset. His crew gathered around the tank. Corporal Leon Foster, gunner. Private First Class Willie Thompson, driver. Private Eugene Harris, loader. Sergeant Roy Dixon, radio operator. All black men. All told, since basic training, they weren't good enough to fight. Foster spoke first. We going? Gates didn't answer immediately. Disobeying direct orders meant court-martial, possible execution. He'd seen it happen to a black private in Georgia who'd talked back to a white officer. The man was shot the same day. But those surrounded infantry were dying. The gap was wide open. German armor would roll through unchallenged. Dixon pulled out a cigarette. Command knows about that gap. They're choosing not to cover it. He lit the cigarette. Question is whether we're choosing to follow orders or save lives. Foster checked the main gun's ammunition count. 23 rounds. Thompson started the engine without being told. Harris climbed into the loader's position. They weren't asking permission, they were telling Gates they'd made their choice. Gates looked east toward the gap, then back at his 4 other tanks. He grabbed the company radio, called the other tank commanders. Lieutenant Benjamin Crawford, Lieutenant David Ellis, Lieutenant Raymond Pierce, Lieutenant John Murphy. All of them had been listening to the same radio traffic. All of them had seen the gap on the map. This is Gates. We're moving east to engage enemy armor. Anyone not coming, say so now. Silence for 5 seconds. Then Crawford's voice. Right behind you. Ellis. Moving out. Pierce. Let's go. Murphy. About time. 5 Sherman tanks. 75mm guns. 35 tons each. Maximum speed 25 miles per hour on good roads. Armor that German 88s could penetrate at 1,000 yards. The Americans called them Ronsons. 1 shot, and they lit up like cigarette lighters. Gates climbed into the commander's position. Thompson, head east, stay in the trees as long as possible. The tank lurched forward. Behind them, the other 4 Shermans followed in column. They were leaving their assigned position, disobeying direct orders, charging toward 5 German Panzers with no support, no air cover, and no authorization. The radio erupted. Division command screaming for them to return to position immediately. Gates switched off the receiver. Whatever happened next, He'd deal with the consequences later. Right now, 2,000 American infantry were surrounded, and German armor was moving to finish them off. The tree line ended half a mile from the gap. Gates ordered the column to spread out into attack formation. 5 Shermans in a line, 50 yards between each tank. Through the thermal scope, he could see the German Panzers clearly now. Panzer IVs, long-barreled 75mm guns, thick frontal armor. They were moving slowly, confidently. They didn't know the 761st was coming. Foster ranged the lead German tank. 1,200 yards. Well within killing range for the German gun, but the Sherman 75 was effective only at closer distances. Gates needed to get within 500 yards for a clean shot. That meant crossing 700 yards of open ground while German gunners tracked them. "All tanks, advance at speed, fire on the move." The 5 Shermans surged forward, engines roaring, tracks throwing up dirt. The German tanks spotted them immediately. The lead Panzer traversed its turret. Gates saw the muzzle flash. The round screamed past, missing by 10 feet. Foster fired back. The shot went wide. 400 yards. The Germans fired again. This time the round hit Crawford's tank. Sparks flew off the frontal armor. The Sherman kept moving. Crawford's voice on the radio. "We're hit, but still rolling." 300 yards. Gates's tank fired again. This time Foster's aim was true. The round punched through the lead Panzer's side armor. Smoke poured from the hatches. 1 down, 4 to go. The German tanks split formation. 2 moved north, 2 south. Classic flanking maneuver. They were trying to get shots at the Sherman's thin side armor. Gates ordered Ellis and Pierce to engage the northern group. He'd take Crawford and Murphy against the southern pair. 200 yards. Point-blank range for tank combat. Foster fired, loaded, fired again. The second German tank erupted in flames. Ellis reported 1 kill on the northern flank. 3 Panzers left. But now German infantry was emerging from the tree line. Panzerfaust anti-tank rockets, MG-42 machine guns. The tanks had driven straight into a German strongpoint. Thompson spun the Sherman hard left. A Panzerfaust rocket streaked past the turret. Harris loaded high-explosive rounds. Foster switched targets to the infantry positions. The 75 barked. German soldiers disappeared in the blast, but more kept coming. Gates grabbed the radio, called the surrounded American infantry, gave them his position, told them to break out west toward the tank column. The young lieutenant's voice came back, steadier now. "Copy that. We're moving." Murphy's tank took a direct hit. The Sherman stopped dead. Black smoke poured from the engine compartment. The crew bailed out. German machine gun fire cut down the driver before he hit the ground. The other 4 crew members ran for Gates's tank. Dixon provided covering fire with the .50 caliber, 100 yards. The remaining German Panzers were withdrawing. They'd lost 3 tanks and seen 5 Shermans willing to charge straight into their guns. The German infantry was falling back too. The gap was open. American infantry began streaming through, running past the burning German tanks towards safety. Gates's radio crackled back to life. Division command. Not screaming anymore. Just 2 words. Status report. Gates keyed the mic. 5 enemy tanks engaged, 3 destroyed, 2 withdrew. Gap secured. American infantry extracted. 1 friendly tank disabled, 1 KIA, battalion mobile and combat effective. Long silence. Then a different voice. Deeper. Authority. "This is General McBride. Hold that position. Reinforcements en route. Well done." The radio went dead. Foster looked back at Gates from the gunner's position. "We in trouble?" Gates watched the American infantry still pouring through the gap. Wounded men being carried. Medics running between groups. 2,000 lives that would have been lost if 5 black tankers hadn't decided orders were less important than doing what was right. "Probably," Gates said, "but they're alive." The 761st Tank Battalion had just fought its first major engagement. They'd disobeyed orders, charged into superior enemy forces, and won. It would not be the last time. But it was the moment that proved what black soldiers had been saying since the war began: "Give us the chance, and we'll fight as hard as anyone." The German defensive line had been broken, not by the white armored divisions that command had trusted, but by 5 Sherman tanks crewed by men who'd been told they'd never be good enough. The reinforcements arrived an hour later, white tank battalions rolling through the gap the 761st had opened. None of them acknowledged Gates or his crews. They just kept driving, taking credit for a breakthrough they hadn't made. The reinforcements came with a colonel, white, 50s, face like carved granite. He stepped out of his jeep and walked straight to Gates's tank. Didn't salute, didn't introduce himself, just stared at the burning German Panzers and the streams of rescued infantry still moving west. "You're the one who broke formation." Gates climbed down from the tank. "Yes, sir." "You ignored direct orders." "Yes, sir." The colonel looked at Murphy's disabled Sherman, at the covered body of the driver, at the 4 tanks still idling in combat formation. "How many enemy tanks?" 5 engaged, 3 confirmed kills, 2 withdrew. The colonel turned back to Gates. "You understand you should be arrested?" "Yes, sir." "You understand your entire unit could face courts-martial?" "Yes, sir." The colonel was quiet for 10 seconds. Then he pulled out a map and spread it on the hood of his jeep. "German line runs from here to here. You just opened a 3-mile gap. Division wants to exploit it before Jerry plugs the hole. Your battalion will advance northeast. Objective is the town of Guebling. 4 miles. Heavy resistance expected." Gates stared at the map. The colonel was giving them another suicide mission. Guebling sat at a crossroads defended by German artillery, machine gun nests, and at least 2 companies of infantry. Taking it would require combined arms, tanks, infantry, air support. The 761st had 4 operational Shermans and no support. "When do we move?" 20 minutes. "White infantry will follow once you've cleared the approach routes." The colonel folded his map. "You wanted to prove black soldiers can fight? Here's your chance. Take that town or die trying." He got back in his jeep and drove off. Dixon lit another cigarette. That wasn't an order. That was a death sentence. Gates looked at his remaining tank commanders. Crawford's Sherman had a hole punched in the frontal armor, but the tank was still mobile. Ellis and Pierce were undamaged. Murphy's crew had redistributed to the other tanks. 4 Shermans against a fortified town. "We got 20 minutes to prep. Load extra ammo. Check the engines. Anyone gets hit, the rest keep moving." Foster climbed back into the gunner's position. "Sarge, they're sending us to die." "Maybe," Gates said. "But if we take that town, they can't say we didn't earn it." The 761st rolled out 18 minutes later. No preliminary artillery, no airstrikes, no infantry support. Just 4 Shermans moving northeast toward Guebling. The approach was across open farmland, perfect killing ground for German anti-tank guns. They made it half a mile before the first 88 fired. The round hit the ground 10 yards in front of Gates's tank. Dirt and shrapnel sprayed across the hull. Thompson swerved right. Foster scanned for the gun position. There, camouflaged in a barn 800 yards northeast. Foster fired. The barn exploded. Crawford's voice on the radio. "Contact left, machine gun nest in the farmhouse." Ellis's Sherman traversed and fired high explosive. The farmhouse collapsed, but the machine gun kept firing from the rubble. German infantry were dug in all along the approach. This wasn't just a defensive position, it was a prepared kill zone. 2 miles out, they hit the first minefield. Thompson stopped the tank as explosions erupted 50 yards ahead. Pierce's Sherman triggered a mine. The explosion threw a track. The tank was immobilized. Pierce and his crew bailed out and ran for Crawford's tank while German mortars started dropping. 3 Shermans left. Gates ordered them into a wedge formation. They'd drive straight through the minefield at speed. Mines were designed to disable tanks, not destroy them outright. Better to take track damage than sit still for German artillery. Thompson punched the throttle. The Shermans surged forward. The first mine went off under the right track. The tank shuddered but kept moving. A second mine detonated under the left side. Sparks flew. The tank slewed sideways, but Thompson corrected. Behind them, Crawford and Ellis were taking hits too. All 3 tanks were damaged but still rolling. 1 mile out, German artillery opened up. Nebelwerfer rockets. 6 barrels firing in rapid sequence. The distinctive shriek filled the air. Gates saw the rockets arc overhead and slam into the ground behind them. The Germans were trying to cut off their retreat. Smart. But the 761st wasn't retreating. Foster fired on the move, loading and shooting as fast as Harris could feed rounds. Every building that might hold German infantry took a high-explosive shell. Every defensive position got hammered. The 3 Shermans were churning through ammunition, but they were still advancing. Half a mile out, the German 88s were firing at point-blank range now. Crawford's tank took a direct hit. The round penetrated the turret. The Sherman stopped immediately. No fire, no explosion, just stopped. Gates called on the radio. No response. Crawford and his entire crew were gone. 2 tanks left. Dixon was on the .50 caliber, sweeping German infantry trying to flank them. Thompson was pushing the damaged Sherman to its limits, 20 miles per hour across cratered farmland. Foster was methodical, picking targets and killing them before moving to the next. 400 yards. They could see Guebling clearly now. Stone buildings, church steeple, town square, and in the square, German soldiers running for defensive positions. The element of surprise was gone, but momentum was everything. If they stopped now, the 88s would finish them. Straight through the middle, Gates ordered. Don't stop until we reach the square. Thompson aimed for the main street. Ellis's tank paralleled them 50 yards to the right. Both Shermans were firing continuously. Buildings exploded. German soldiers dove for cover. The tanks smashed through wooden barricades and crushed parked vehicles. 200 yards. A Panzerfaust team rose from a cellar. The rocket streaked toward Ellis's Sherman. Direct hit on the turret. The tank kept moving for 10 seconds, then slewed left and crashed into a building. Ellis's voice on the radio, strained. Turrets jammed. We're bailing out. 1 tank left. Gates's Sherman rolled into the town square alone. German infantry everywhere, machine guns firing from windows, rifle fire pinging off the armor. Dixon was hit on the .50 caliber. He dropped into the turret, blood streaming from his shoulder. Harris took over the machine gun. Foster fired the main gun into the church. The 75mm round punched through the stone wall. German soldiers poured out of the building. Thompson ran them down. The Sherman's tracks crushed sandbag positions and scattered German defensive lines. But the tank was dying, oil pressure dropping, engine temperature in the red, transmission grinding. They'd taken too much damage crossing the minefield. The Sherman had maybe 5 minutes of mobility left. Gates made the call. Thompson rammed the town hall. We're making a strong point. Thompson aimed the Sherman at the largest building on the square and pushed the throttle wide open. The tank smashed through the main doors and into the building's first floor. The engine died immediately. They were stuck inside the town hall with German infantry surrounding them. Gates grabbed his Thompson submachine gun. Everybody out. We hold this building. The crew bailed out into chaos. German soldiers were charging the town hall from 3 directions. Harris and Thompson set up the .30 caliber machine guns at windows. Foster had a bar. Dixon, bleeding from his shoulder, loaded magazines. Gates moved between positions, directing fire. Ellis's crew arrived 30 seconds later. They'd fought their way across the square on foot. 8 men total now holding 1 building in the center of a German-occupied town. The radio was still working in the disabled Sherman. Gates called division. This is Gates. Guebling occupied, requesting immediate infantry support. The response was immediate. Negative. No units available. Hold position. Gates looked at his men. They'd just driven 4 tanks through a minefield, destroyed German defensive positions, and seized the center of a fortified town. Now command was leaving them to die. Again. Dixon tied a bandage around his shoulder. How long you think we can hold? Until we run out of ammo or they bring up a tank. Foster fired a burst from the window. How much ammo we got? Harris checked. Maybe 200 rounds for the 30s, 50 for the bar. Whatever's in our Thompsons. Not enough. The Germans were already organizing for a coordinated assault. Gates could hear officers shouting commands. Machine guns were being repositioned. They were bringing up a mortar. They're going to shell us until we're dead, or they can rush the building, Ellis said. Either way, we're done. Thompson looked at Gates. Should have followed orders. Gates ejected the magazine from his Thompson and checked the rounds. 32 left. Maybe. But those 2,000 infantry are alive. That's worth something. Not if we're dead. Still worth it. The first mortar round hit the building's second floor. The explosion shook dust from the ceiling. The Germans were finding their range. The next rounds would come through the windows. Gates distributed the men to cover all approaches. Then he grabbed the radio one more time. "Any American unit on this frequency? This is Lieutenant Gates, 761st Tank Battalion. We are holding Guebling Town Hall. Heavy enemy contact. If anyone can hear this, we've opened the door. All you have to do is walk through." He released the mic and picked up his Thompson. Outside, German infantry were massing for the assault. Inside, 8 black tankers were down to their last ammunition. The breakthrough had cost them everything, but the gap was still open, and somewhere behind them, American forces were finally moving forward. The second mortar round came through the window. The mortar round exploded in the stairwell. Stone fragments sprayed across the first floor. Harris was thrown backward, bleeding from his face. Foster dragged him behind the disabled Sherman and checked his wounds. Shrapnel cuts, nothing fatal. Harris grabbed his rifle and crawled back to the window. German infantry rushed the building from the east. 20 men, maybe more. Thompson opened up with the .30 caliber. The machine gun hammered for 6 seconds, then clicked empty. Thompson grabbed his Thompson submachine gun as German soldiers reached the blown-out doorway. The first 2 Germans died in the entrance. Thompson's submachine gun cut them down at 5 feet. The next 3 made it inside. Ellis shot one with his pistol. Foster smashed another with the butt of his bar. The third raised his rifle. Gates fired twice. The German dropped. More mortar rounds hit the building. The second floor collapsed into the first. Burning wood and stone crashed down. Dixon was pinned under a beam. Foster and Ellis pulled him free. His left leg was broken. He propped himself against the wall with a rifle. 1 round left in the magazine. "Save it," Gates told him. German machine gun fire raked the windows. The .30 caliber was empty. The bar had maybe 20 rounds. Thompson's submachine guns were down to partial magazines. Harris had 6 rifle rounds, 8 men with less than 50 bullets between them. Thompson wiped blood from his forehead. "How long?" Gates checked his watch. They'd been holding the town hall for 12 minutes, felt like hours. "Not long now. Until what?" "Until they kill us or reinforcements arrive. Reinforcements aren't coming. Then they kill us." The Germans tried the north entrance next. Gates heard boots on stone. He moved to the doorway with his Thompson. 6 Germans came through in a rush. Gates fired until the magazine was empty. 3 went down. The other 3 kept coming. Foster met them with the bar, point-blank range. The heavy rifle fire stopped them cold, but the bar clicked empty after the burst. Foster reversed it and swung like a club, connected with a German helmet. The man collapsed. Another German lunged with a bayonet. Ellis shot him. Thompson was fighting hand-to-hand with the last German. Both men crashed through the rubble. Thompson got on top and slammed the German's head against the stone floor until he stopped moving. Thompson stood up, breathing hard. "I'm out." "We're all out." Harris limped to the window. "Sarge, they're bringing up a tank." Gates looked. Panzer IV rolling into the square. 75mm gun traversing toward the town hall. At this range, 1 shot would bring down the entire building. Gates had no ammunition, no anti-tank weapons, nothing. "Everybody downstairs. Get behind the Sherman's armor." The crew dragged Dixon down into the basement. The disabled Sherman sat in the middle of the floor where they'd crashed it through the wall. Its armor wouldn't stop a 75mm round, but it might absorb some of the blast. They took cover behind the tank and waited. The Panzer fired. The round punched through the stone wall and exploded inside the first floor. The concussion knocked them all down. Dust and smoke filled the basement. Gates couldn't hear anything except ringing in his ears. He pulled himself up using the Sherman's track. The Germans would rush the building now. They knew the defenders were out of ammunition. Gates found a piece of metal pipe in the rubble. Foster grabbed a broken rifle to use as a club. Ellis had a bayonet. Thompson still had his fists. Boots on the stairs. Multiple contacts. Gates gripped the pipe and moved toward the stairwell. The first German came down fast. Gates swung, connected with the man's knee. The German screamed and fell. Foster hit him with the rifle stock. More Germans poured down the stairs. Too many. The basement became a brawl. Men fighting with fists, rocks, anything they could grab. Gates lost the pipe and was fighting with his hands. A German got him in a chokehold. Thompson broke the hold by driving his elbow into the German's ribs. Harris was on the ground, wrestling with a German twice his size. The German had a knife. Harris grabbed the man's wrist with both hands, holding the blade away from his throat. Foster stomped on the German's arm. The knife clattered away. Gates heard engines, heavy engines, multiple vehicles. The Germans heard it too. They pulled back from the basement, regrouping. Everyone stopped fighting. The sound was getting louder, coming from the west. American engines. Sherman tanks crashed into the square. Not one or two. Dozens. White armored battalions rolling through the gap the 761st had opened. Infantry riding on the tanks. Artillery pieces being towed behind. The entire American advance was pouring into Guebling. The Germans in the basement looked at each other. Then they dropped their weapons and raised their hands. One spoke in broken English. "We surrender." Gates leaned against the Sherman, trying to catch his breath. His hands were covered in blood. Couldn't tell if it was his or someone else's. Dixon was unconscious. Harris had a knife wound in his side. Thompson's face was swelling from multiple hits. Foster was holding his ribs like they might be broken. Ellis had a gash across his forehead. American infantry swarmed the town hall. White soldiers. They looked at the 8 black tankers in shock, at the disabled Sherman crashed through the wall, at the German prisoners with their hands up, at the bodies scattered across the floor. A white captain came down the stairs. Young, clean uniform. He stared at Gates. "Who are you?" "Lieutenant Gates, 761st Tank Battalion." "You took this town?" "Held it." "You took it." The captain looked around the basement again. "Jesus Christ." He called up the stairs. "Get medics down here. Americans wounded." The medics came. They loaded Dixon onto a stretcher first, then Harris. The others refused treatment until the wounded were evacuated. Gates climbed back up to the first floor. The square was full of American vehicles. Tanks, trucks, jeeps, artillery. The entire advance had come through Guebling. Through the gap, the 761st had opened. A jeep pulled up. The same colonel from before. He got out and walked to where Gates stood in the ruins of the town hall entrance. The colonel looked at the destruction, at the German bodies, at the burning Panzer, at Gates. Casualty report. 2 tanks destroyed, 2 disabled, 8 crew members killed, 11 wounded, 4 still combat effective. "And you held this position?" "Yes, sir." The colonel was quiet for a long moment. "I gave you an order I thought would get you killed." "Yes, sir." "I underestimated you." "Yes, sir." The colonel pulled out a cigarette and lit it. "Your battalion just changed this war. Every white unit that said black soldiers couldn't fight, every general who said you weren't ready, every politician who said segregation was necessary, you just proved them wrong." Gates looked at the American forces flooding through Guebling. "Permission to speak freely, sir." "Granted. We didn't do this to prove anything. We did it because American soldiers were dying and we had tanks." The colonel nodded slowly. "That's exactly why you proved everything." He dropped the cigarette and crushed it under his boot. "Get your wounded evacuated. Division is sending fresh tanks and replacement crews. You'll be back in action in 48 hours. "Back in action?" "You opened the door. Now you're going to walk through it with the rest of us." The colonel got back in his jeep. "That's an order, Lieutenant." Foster limped over to Gates as the jeep drove away. "Sarge, did he just say we're going back out?" 48 hours. We got 4 men left. We'll have replacement crews by then." Thompson joined them, his face swollen and bruised. "What if we just quit? We proved the point." Gates looked at him. "You want to quit?" Thompson thought about it, then shook his head. "No, me neither." Ellis came out of the town hall supporting Harris, who had refused to get on a stretcher. "They're calling us heroes back at division. Said we broke through where white units failed." "We're not heroes," Gates said. "We're tankers. We did what tankers do." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't that simple. The 761st hadn't just fought. They'd done something nobody believed black soldiers could do. They'd taken impossible orders and made them possible. They'd charged into German defensive lines without support. They'd held positions when everyone expected them to die. And they'd done it all while proving that courage had no color. Fresh Sherman tanks rolled into the square. Replacement crews climbed out. Young black soldiers, fresh from training. They looked at the destroyed German Panzer, at the burning buildings, at the veterans of the 761st, battered and bloodied but still standing. One of the new recruits approached Gates. Couldn't have been more than 19. "Sir, they said you broke the Nazi line." Gates looked at the kid, saw himself 6 months ago, before the combat, before the casualties, before he learned that war wasn't about proving anything to anyone. "We opened a gap," Gates said. "Division did the rest. But you went first. Someone had to." The kid nodded, trying to absorb that. Gates put a hand on his shoulder. "What's your name?" "Private Anderson, sir." "You scared, Anderson?" "Yes, sir." "Good. Scared keeps you alive. Stupid gets you killed, remember that." "Yes, sir." Gates looked at Foster, Thompson, Ellis, the survivors. In 48 hours they'd be back in combat. More gaps to open, more impossible orders to follow, more chances to die proving what they'd already proven. But that was the job. That was what they'd signed up for. Not to prove black soldiers were equal, just to fight. And fighting was what the 761st Tank Battalion did better than anyone expected. The German defensive line had been broken, the road to Germany was open, and the first tanks through that gap had been crewed by men the army said weren't good enough to fight. They'd proven everyone wrong. Now they had to keep proving it every single day until the war ended. 48 hours later, the 761st Tank Battalion rolled back into combat. Fresh tanks, replacement crews mixed with veterans. Gates commanded a full company now, 16 Shermans. The orders were simple. Keep advancing until you hit the Rhine. November turned to December. The weather turned brutal. Snow and mud slowed every advance. German resistance stiffened as they fell back toward their homeland. Every town was defended. Every bridge was blown. Every kilometer cost blood. The 761st fought through it all. Diemeringen, Urmingen, Biening. Small French towns most Americans had never heard of. The tankers learned them by the German units they faced there. The 11th Panzer Division, the 6th SS Mountain Division, the 17th SS Panzer Grenadier Division. Foster became a tank commander after Gates was promoted to captain. Thompson took over as driver trainer for new crews. Ellis was assigned to lead reconnaissance elements. Dixon recovered from his wounds and returned to command a platoon. The battalion was growing, absorbing replacement crews every week to replace the dead. In Tillet, Belgium, during the Battle of the Bulge, Staff Sergeant Ruben Rivers commanded a Sherman when German infantry surrounded his position. Rivers had taken shrapnel 2 days earlier. Medics had ordered him evacuated. He'd refused. Now his tank was the only thing standing between German infantry and an American supply depot. Rivers held for 6 hours. His tank took multiple hits. The engine was dying. The ammunition was nearly gone. When German Panzerfausts finally disabled the Sherman, Rivers kept firing the 50 caliber machine gun until a German round killed him. The supply depot held. 40 trucks full of ammunition and medical supplies were saved. Nobody wrote it up for a medal. Rivers was buried in a military cemetery in Belgium. His family received a telegram 3 weeks later. Killed in action, no details, no recognition, just another casualty. The 761st didn't stop. They crossed into Germany in March 1945. The enemy was fighting on their own soil now, desperate, fanatical. Every bunker had to be cleared, every village taken house by house. German civilians watched the black tankers roll past their homes with expressions of shock and fear. At Coburg, the battalion linked up with elements of the 4th Armored Division, white tankers. They'd heard stories about the 761st. Some didn't believe them. One white sergeant approached Gates after a briefing. "Heard you guys broke through at Guebling without support." "That's right." "Heard you held a town hall with no ammunition." "That's right, too." The white sergeant looked at Gates's Sherman. It was covered in dents from German anti-tank rounds. The barrel was scarred from constant firing. The crew looked like walking corpses, exhausted, filthy, alive. "How many days straight you been in combat?" Gates had to think about it. He'd lost count somewhere around day 100. "Since November 8th. Haven't been pulled off the line once." The white sergeant did the math in his head. "That's over 4 months." 147 days, Dixon said, checking a notebook where he'd been keeping count. 47 more than any other armored unit in 3rd Army. The white sergeant shook his head. "Jesus, we get pulled back every 6 weeks for rest and refit. You're telling me you haven't had a break?" Command keeps giving us objectives. We keep taking them. Why don't you request relief? Gates looked at him like he was crazy. Because then they'd say black soldiers can't handle sustained combat. We stop when the war stops. The white sergeant walked away, shaking his head. Word spread through the 4th Armored. The 761st had been in continuous combat for 5 months. No breaks, no rest, just fighting. White units that had been skeptical started showing respect. But respect didn't come from above. Division command still sent the 761st into the worst positions, still assigned them the hardest objectives, still expected them to fail so they could prove segregation was justified. The 761st kept succeeding. At Steyr, Austria, they encountered die-hard SS units making a final stand. The fighting was vicious. German soldiers fighting to the death. American tanks burning in the streets. Foster's Sherman took a direct hit. The crew bailed out. Foster was the last one out. His uniform was on fire. He rolled in the mud to put out the flames and kept fighting. The 761st took Steyr. Then they kept advancing. Wels, Lambach, Gunskirchen, each town adding to the count, each battle adding to the casualties. By the time they reached Gunskirchen concentration camp, the battalion had been in combat for 183 consecutive days. The camp was liberation, not combat. The 761st tankers rolled through the gates on May 4, 1945. What they found there broke something inside every man who saw it. Thousands of prisoners, living skeletons, bodies stacked like wood. The smell of death so thick it stuck to their uniforms. Gates walked through the camp with his crew. Survivors grabbed at them, speaking languages they didn't understand. Some just touched the Americans' uniforms to make sure they were real. One prisoner, barely able to stand, looked at Gates's face, looked at his skin, then started crying. An interpreter explained, "He says he thought only white soldiers would come. He didn't know black men fought in this war." Gates didn't know what to say to that. He just helped the man to a medical tent and went back to work. There were thousands more to feed, to clothe, to save. 4 days later, Germany surrendered. The war in Europe was over. The 761st Tank Battalion had fought for 183 consecutive days. They'd participated in 4 major campaigns. They'd been awarded 11 Silver Stars, 69 Bronze Stars, and 371 Purple Hearts. They'd lost 71 men killed in action, 463 wounded, and when the victory celebrations happened, they weren't invited. White units marched in parades, white generals gave speeches, white politicians took credit. The 761st went back to their barracks and waited for orders to ship home. General George Patton visited them 1 week after the surrender. He stood in front of the assembled battalion and looked at the battered men who'd fought under his command. His speech was brief. "I don't care what color you are. You're tankers. You fought like tankers. Some people said you couldn't do it. You proved them wrong. I'm proud to have had you in 3rd Army." That was it. No medals, no promotions, no recognition, just acknowledgement from one general that they'd done their job. The battalion shipped home in July. They arrived in New York Harbor expecting something, parades maybe, recognition. Instead, they were ordered to stay on the ship while white units disembarked first. When the 761st finally came down the gangplank, there were no crowds, no cameras, no celebration. They were quietly disbanded, sent back to their hometowns, back to segregated America, back to being second-class citizens. Some found work, others struggled. Dixon opened a mechanic shop in Detroit. Foster became a teacher. Thompson drove trucks. Ellis worked in a factory. Gates stayed in the army. He fought in Korea. Retired as a major in 1963, just as the civil rights movement was reaching its peak. He never talked much about the war. When people asked, he'd say he drove tanks and let it go at that. But in 1997, 52 years after the war ended, the Army finally acknowledged what the 761st had done. Staff Sergeant Ruben Rivers was awarded the Medal of Honor posthumously. 7 members of the battalion received belated recognition for their service. Gates attended the ceremony. He was 78 years old. A reporter asked him what it meant to finally receive recognition. Gates thought about it, thought about Guebling, about Tillet, about the 183 days of continuous combat, about the men who died proving what everyone should have already known. "It's nice," he said, "but we didn't do it for medals. We did it because it needed doing. Do you think you changed anything?" Gates looked at the reporter. "We proved black soldiers could fight. 3 years later, President Truman integrated the military. You tell me if we changed anything." The reporter pressed. "Was it worth it?" Gates thought about Rivers dying in his tank in Belgium, about Crawford killed in his Sherman outside Guebling, about all the men who never came home, about the decades of segregation they came back to despite their service. "Freedom isn't free," Gates said finally. "We paid the price. Whether America learned the lesson, that's not for me to say." He walked away from the interview, walked past the memorials and the displays and the politicians making speeches, found Foster and Thompson and Dixon, the survivors. They stood together quietly, remembering the 761st Tank Battalion had been told they couldn't fight. They'd proven everyone wrong by fighting harder and longer than any other armored unit in the European theater. They'd broken Nazi defensive lines. They'd liberated concentration camps. They'd earned the respect of their enemies and the grudging acknowledgement of their own command. And then they'd gone home to an America that still didn't treat them as equals. But they'd done something that couldn't be undone. They'd proven that courage has no color, that competence isn't limited by race, that when given the chance, black soldiers could fight, could win, could sacrifice just as much as anyone else. The legacy of the 761st wasn't just military. It was the crack in segregation that eventually broke the whole system. Every black soldier who served after them served in an integrated military. Every barrier that fell after 1948 fell partly because the 761st Tank Battalion had already knocked down the first wall. They were told they couldn't fight. They proved everyone wrong, and in doing so they changed America forever. That's the story. Not of heroes, just of tankers who did their job when everyone said they couldn't. Sometimes that's all it takes to change the world.